Okay, don't say anything you shouldn't say. We're live. All right, then. Welcome. Welcome to episode 24 of Roll by Roll's Tavern Talk, a show where we, the Roll by Roll gang, discuss various aspects of running a great D&D campaign based on our experiences with D&D 5e and our current adventures in Emathan homebrew. My name is Colin, and I am joined tonight by Egan. How's it going, Egan?
Hello. 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 Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm glad you're here, or I'd have no one to talk to tonight.
It would be
so,
an interesting tavern talk.
yeah, so Max is busy with other commitments tonight, so he's not able to join us. So, Egan and I figured, what the heck? We're going to go for this ourselves with a little topic that we wanted to talk about for a while. So I think if anybody has ever in a DM role tried to create a balanced combat encounter for D&D 5e, you know that it can very much be a crapshoot. I'd even go so far as to say, and why we've named tonight's episode that way, that there is no such thing as a balanced encounter. Um, so tonight, Egan and I are going to discuss combat encounters, why they're so hard to balance, and a few of our tricks that can help get you a little closer. But you're never gonna nail this ever, ever. So we'll start out. Maybe actually I'm gonna get you to start, Egan. But let's start off and talk a little bit about, in your mind, Egan, what is a balanced encounter?
Yeah, and I think it's there's no one answer to that, right? Because there could be, as we've talked before, there could be a dungeon crawl. So is a balanced attack just a number of small attacks that sort of culminate? Is it a epic final scene type of thing? Is it, a transitional type of or a random encounter and stuff like that? So a balanced attack really depends on the situation, right? I think what a lot of the tricks that we're going to talk about tonight are going to be sort of a planned out encounter that the DM has for a party that is not a just hack and slash dungeon crawl, right? It's pertinent to a story. It's falling between role playing. It's, maybe trying to, acquire an important item that we know there's going to be a battle. What makes that a balanced attack, or how can we do that? That I think is what we're going to try to give some tips for tonight. But that's what I think. There's a lot of different variations.
Yeah, I mean, for me, at a very sort of high level, the way I think of a balanced encounter, sort of the general idea there is you're presenting a challenging and fun fight for your party without it ending in a total party kill, right?
Yeah,
It because I mean, a total party kill kind of tends to remove that fun part, when everybody's
kind of
dead. It's
ends
like, oh,
things.
that was great, right, until we all died. um
Yeah,
and um it's one of those things where you're like the mad scientist trying to put together this concoction that takes the party, right to the edge of that total party kill, and then in the end they all live happily ever after. And
they make
that's
it out of it.
that's where they all, it's like, oh my, that was so much fun, right? And it is so hard to accomplish.
Yeah, it is.
So hard to accomplish. I know
Yeah.
for myself personally, putting together, or not even, yeah, I guess putting together I don't even want to call it a balanced encounter, because, like I said, I don't really think about a balanced encounter exists. But putting
Yeah.
together a combat encounter that achieves that challenge and that fun, it's one of the hardest things in the game for me personally.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
So, give us one of your reasons, Egan. Why do you think creating a balanced encounter is so hard?
So, and no offense, 5e and the creators, but your challenge ratings, they just don't. It's not a question of, sort of, oh, there was some bad rolls on the player or the monster's part and some really good rolls on the player's part. I don't think the challenge ratings equal any semi-decent party's balance at any level. I think, in Adventures of Emathan, we've had a couple of encounters that were, you even said it, were considered deadly, and I think only one player took damage.
Yep.
So I think, there are some people out there that have done, on their own, some homebrew stuff that might be worth a look-see. But I think starting there, the challenge ratings that are in the Dungeon Master guides are not equivalent to what is in reality. I know right before the show we talked about, what you said is it's basing it on things that maybe aren't in your game. Not everything is a dungeon crawl, right? It's, as we talked about, we tend to have maybe one battle a session because we're world building, we're role playing and stuff like that. So throw it out.
Yeah.
It's I don't think it's relevant. And also I think the game itself is geared towards not killing players, but there is a thrill about coming close. There's a thrill about being the hero that saves the day, and you don't have that if nobody's challenged. So, but as to the why, I think it starts there. Mechanically, I don't think anyone has found that right formula that consistently gives challenges to the players.
Yeah, I so before we fired up here, um, I was reading from an article here by DM Dave. I'll make sure it's in the show notes there. But it's this step one is understanding the design basics that D&D 5e, and this is an article around helping to balance. And the two basic premises that D&D 5e in terms of combat encounters are sort of they hang their hat on. The first is each adventuring day, a party of 3 to 5 adventurers should be able to handle 6 to 8 medium or hard encounters. So, that really lends itself to dungeon crawls, to exploration, but I certainly think we see more games now that are really hanging their hats on the interactions, on the role playing, and um, coming up with 6 to 8 medium or hard encounters in a single day. That's really hard to do, right? And the second part is most combat encounters should last 3 rounds on average. Um, so that one is really baffling to me because finding the right monsters to be able to do that is difficult when you're trying to make it work with the story.
Yeah.
If you can just look at the monsters you have available and say thematically, does that work with the story right now? And it's like, no. So I have a very limited amount of monsters that can hit that hard so that
Yeah.
something happens within 3 rounds, right?
Yeah.
And getting back to the challenge rating, I think one of the big or there's two big things that I see that are a problem around challenge rating. The first is challenge ratings are undoubtedly worked through based on those two principles that we just talked about, those two
Yeah.
premises, right? And there is no way for a challenge rating to take into account the party's strengths and weaknesses,
Right.
right? So if you have a monster that hits big with lightning, but for whatever reason the party is immune to lightning, it's no longer whatever challenge rating it says
Right.
it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, challenge rating and it's the basis of all of the calculators that are out there is challenge ratings. So that really makes
If I
them
could also
difficult.
mention, Colin, I'm sorry, it, going back to those formulas they have, 6 encounters, average of 3 rounds, 18 rounds of combat in a single session. You're not doing anything else.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, think about that.
It,
18
it it
rounds
can
of
be a
combat.
very long time depending on how long your session. It can
Yeah,
be a pretty, we've had some big combats before.
sure,
I don't think we've
sure.
ever gotten to 18 rounds, but
No.
we've had a combat that's lasted an hour of our
Right,
session,
right,
and I'm
right,
sure we didn't get to 18 rounds of combat. I mean, maybe if you're a smaller group, that's not that big, but if you're that 3 to 5 players, well, it's pretty easy to get there, right?
right, right. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's if you go by that premise, you'll see why the challenge rating is skewed, if you will, or at least a little bit off for what
Yeah.
you're trying to do.
So now for me, a problem that I see in terms of building a balanced encounter is there are so many variables that you need to factor in.
Yeah,
It's almost mind numbing if you're trying to think of, because you've got things beyond the abilities of all the characters, so their actual abilities and how they work against whatever particular monster they're fighting. Um, the tactics that the party tends to develop over time.
right.
So you've got which of those tactics are they gonna, one of the, if you remember back in Storm King's Thunder, one of the tactics you guys used all the time was fog cloud,
Yeah,
right? So now, but is today the day you're going to use fog cloud, or are you going to
right,
use
right.
something else? Do I
Yeah,
what do I figure out? This day is the variable,
right, right.
and um, and then on top of all of these variables, you have the biggest variable of all, which is what's that, Egan? What's the biggest variable of all?
Dice?
Dice rolls. Like you have no way of knowing what the
Yeah,
dice are going to do to you once the session starts.
yeah,
We were talking about in Adventures in Emathan, you guys battled some lightning snakes, and all the dice rolls were going for me, and
yeah.
we just about got a total party kill there,
We were
and it was,
close. We
you
were
know,
close.
and it was a great combat,
Yeah,
but it for me as the DM, I never thought it was going to become as close as it
yeah,
did to wiping everybody out.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, that was a wild one. Got another one, another reason it's hard.
Well, I think there is at least for the great DMs out there, they don't want to kill the party, right? So I don't think it's unfair of saying that could be a factor, right? Like you could easily overpower combat, right? Oh, you guys are facing 3 red dragons. Good luck, fourth level fighter. So you are trying to balance and in the best way possible. But and I can speak for myself. I would rather err on the side of not killing the party, but trying to get them close. So, as I said, once we can find ways, and we're going to talk about ways we can get challenging combats and sort of tricks of the trade, if you will. But I think there's a human nature there because, again, a DM with a group, they put in a lot of time with these characters, especially, the way we play and you want to bring them close. You just don't want to put them there unless it's a value, right? There's a meaningful reason for this to happen. So there might be some big heart there of the DM that plays into to things. So
Yeah, for me, that's it's one of those areas where um, I don't know that I consciously think about um, whether the party members live or die. I mean, my main thing that I'm trying to do is make it challenging, and I
yeah,
and I know inherently that the more challenging it is, the greater the chance that party members could die.
right.
But I, I, the you don't necessarily you don't want to be in the mindset of trying to kill the players.
Right.
or not to kill the players. Like I try
Right.
not to be in that mindset. I just
Yeah.
try and but it's like you said, it's human nature. It's like we got a great story. It's fun. Guys are
Right.
building characters they're enjoying. There was a time we played that style of game. You go back to our early days of D&D and that was the only way we really thought about it. Every time you sat down at the table, you were
You could die.
anticipating you could lose your character,
Yeah. Yeah. And there
you
were
know.
some DMs that look forward to it. I'm
Oh
telling
yeah,
you.
absolutely. But it was now we tend to want to, build these group stories a little bit more. And if characters are always dropping like flies, it's really hard to carry any type of story, right?
Right.
So it it's such a delicate balance even for a DM of I don't want to I don't want to manipulate the outcome in any way, any extreme way, right?
Right.
The story has to drive itself, but if characters are just dying every time you have a combat, well, that's I
Right.
don't think really at the end of the day, and I know a lot of DMs. Sly Flourish talks about this all the time. It's not really that much fun to have your characters die. Like,
No.
so yes, challenge them, but at the end of the day, if you're like, can I kill them today? That's not really fun for the players. It
Yeah.
really isn't.
I I think too the this I know it sort of expands on this, but there could be ways of consequence that don't result in death,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Like, and that I know could be an entirely different show, but challenging them to where death isn't really the bad thing that happens. Like they could lose a point of an ability because they dropped, or lose a limb, or some consequence, or the NPC that they needed to save died because of their inactions or their loss of a fight. So
Or it
I know
makes
that,
the
yeah,
story more
yeah,
difficult for them to continue
exactly.
moving through, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah, lots of things you can throw, lots of outcomes you can throw at them that doesn't necessarily mean player death, but
Exactly.
does have a negative
A
outcome,
consequence.
right? Yeah, a
Yeah, there's a
consequence exactly.
consequence that maybe isn't the ultimate, sacrifice, if you will.
Yeah, because I mean, you can get to a situation where if the players think they're never going to die, they may play differently, and you don't want that to be, you don't want
Yes.
that to be the and
Yeah.
for a DM too, it's difficult because you may have a group of people with very different mindsets around this concept, right?
Yeah.
You may
Yep.
have some old schoolers that are like, I want to believe I'm going to lose my character every game. And at the
Yeah.
same table, you may have a guy like, if you kill my character, I may leap off a bridge.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like,
They're that
well,
attached. Yeah. Yeah.
there's a balance there for a
Yeah.
DM sometimes to
Yep.
figure out what you're dealing with and how to keep that fun for everyone, right? So
Yep. 100%.
okay, man, let's move into what are some of the things that we can do to I hesitate to say to get it right because again, I don't think you can get this right, but to
No.
give yourself some tools to help steer things when they're not going the way that you wanted them to.
Yeah.
Would you
Yeah.
kick us off there?
Yeah. So again, going back to as a DM, you're prepping your table for the night, and going away from the premise that this is a dungeon crawl, right? That you're going to have one or two meaningful combats this session that may or lead to one or none the next. So we're looking at this through the lens of one or two combats. So kind of keeping that in mind. One of the things, and I have several, but one of the things I like to do is sort of a second wave that I keep in reserve, right? Now, again, the situation has to work for it, right? If you have a single layer monster that, doesn't have minions, then obviously that's going to be difficult, but then create them,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Maybe there is a layer monster that has minions that it brings to life or
Tiny
calls.
tiny version of itself or something, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
There's 100 ways. So You start out what with what you assume will be a nice challenge, okay? Not balance, but challenge. Let's look at it this way. And if it looks like they're not even, using anything but cantrips, you got a second wave that comes in, and maybe from an area that they're not expecting because they're all set up perfectly. They have a nice, melee guys in the front and the range in the back. And oh, look, I've got a second wave coming from the back. And now the
Yep.
ranger folks have themselves. So I like the use of waves, right? To, sort of escalate if needed. And if it's already challenging and they're already up to their necks and it's, one guy maybe dropped and they're using some resources to get through this, then you hold them in, they don't come out, they don't call up for whatever reason. Again, you're trying to entertain the players and have them think of ways to, be heroes. So that is one way I like, and it's a very easy prep because you just sort of duplicate that minion, if you will, throw them out there to be fodder for the
Yeah.
for the party.
And it's a good way to burn up resources, right? If you
Yeah, yeah,
so because um that really, I mean, one of the big things around 5e combat is action economy.
yeah,
um how many actions does the party get versus your monsters, right?
yeah,
And if you're feeling that the action economy is out of balance, because maybe just one big ugly monster works really well for this scene, but even with their multi attack, they got two actions to the party's eight.
yeah,
Well, they're going to lose very quickly, right?
yeah,
But if you throw in those minions or whatever, now you're upping that action economy. You're giving
yeah,
yourself a chance to kind of catch up to the party, right?
yeah, yeah.
So for me, I read this a while ago. I just saw it again today. I like it because it says the first thing to remember about combat encounter building is it's more of an art than a science.
Yes.
It is
Very
not.
well put.
It is not about the
No,
numbers because
no.
we just talked about challenge rating is really broken,
Yeah,
and so the way that the Dungeon Master's Guide, and there's also stuff in Xanathar's Guide to everything, it's really based on numbers, and those numbers all relate back to that challenge rating and experience, and it's like, oh, it's such a broken system to start
yeah,
with, right? So it's a really
yeah.
good place to start. It's good to understand that.
Hmm.
um, in terms of helping get it right for me, take time and read lots of other people's takes on encounter building,
Yeah,
because there's lots of people who have really looked at this, um, and kind of taken it back to some sort of math, but based on different numbers. The way that
yeah,
they think it runs better, with all the years now we've been playing 5e, they're like, yeah, I think if you look at the numbers this way, they work a little better, right? So, um, two people in particular, I'm gonna call out around this: Sly Flourish.
yeah.
He has some fantastic stuff. He has a really simple formula that I often use as just a really. I have it on a posted note here for myself all the time, stuck on my, and it basically says, so this is to help you determine if it's actually a deadly encounter or not. And this is based on a single encounter, not thinking about multiple encounters for the session.
Right, right.
So basically, what you do is you take the total monster CR, and if it is greater than half of the total character levels, you need to start considering if you might have a pretty deadly. So it
Hmm.
helps, but again, I mean, it's loose because there's so many variables still that are in there, right? Another resource that I'll throw out that I just finished reading, I think it's fantastic. So this was a combination by Sly Flourish. Mike Shea is his real name. Mike Shea, Teo Sabadia, and Scott Fitzgerald Gray. They got in together on this, and it's the Lazy Dungeon Master's Forge of Foes for 5e. So the two things that I really like about this book is it helps you, and you sort of you talked about this before. Um, it really helps you understand how to move the dials and the sliders on your
Yeah,
monsters.
yeah,
To if a monster is getting the hay kicked out of him, then dial him up.
yeah,
Or if he's pounding on the party, dial him back a little bit.
yeah,
If a certain monster you want to see this combat hit hard and heavy, then roll down their hit points, roll up their damage. If you
yeah. I'm
want
a
it the
big
other
fan of
way,
that.
if you want it the other way around, roll up their hit points, roll back their damage. If you
Yeah,
know the party is going to do a lot of damage every round, roll up their hit points so that
yeah,
he can hit or he can take a bunch of hits, right?
yeah.
And the Forge of Foes is a fantastic book for that. So
I'm a huge fan of what you just ended there with. Um, Sometimes a short but intense encounter can be as gratifying as a long, drawn out wave
mhm.
after wave. You got a big bad that just doubles its normal damage, but it's half as strong. And there's all sorts of creative ways to make that monster in a reasonable why that happened, right? Oh, they were affected, they're diseased, they're berserk, so they hit harder, but they're easier to hit. There's something about, let's take a seventh level character that has what, 60, 70 hit points on the fighters, that takes 35 points of damage from a hit.
Yeah.
Like that wakes them up,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Now all
I
of a
just lost
sudden,
75% of my hit points. It's
yeah,
like,
now all of a sudden the magic user's not just going to use its cantrip to attack. Now they're going to break out a little bit heavier artillery. It makes for some eyebrows raised and some fun encounters. So I
yeah.
like that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll throw it back to you. You got another one you want to toss out there?
Well, I wish I could bring up the author, and I'll apologize, but I think the topic is that the monsters know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Um, and I think this is,
That is
though.
Keith Allman.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It is a also a it's a heavy thing on the DM because you already have 4,000 things to think about to play a character. Like I have trouble with my Douglin, right? And remembering all the things they can do and how to do it. Well, now you're supposed to, know how to play it. So in your prep, if you do have an encounter that you want to make a little bit, hit a little bit harder, especially with magic type of folk, that seems to be kind of like the hardest thing. um that just study how they work, right? Like a simple thing I say is an orc, like you can't run away from an orc. Okay, like play that into it. Then there's things that have pack tactics. Make sure that they utilize that and surround in one of the PCs and start going after them. Like play these monsters as if they know what they're doing.
I
um
I may or may not be a fan of Keith's
I love it.
stuff. Yeah.
I'm sorry if I took your thunder, man, but
No, no. When
this
you
is like
I agree 100%. The
yeah,
first time I caught on to Keith's stuff, it was like because he looks at he looks at the monsters that are in the monster manual and says based on their build, based on the type of character they are, this is the most logical way that they would engage in combat. I love it. I
right,
love it.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like it, during prep, like just take a little extra time to get to know what they're going to do.
Yep.
Because again, you're not doing this to, penalize the party. You're doing this to throw additional challenges at them, right? I always think ones that control others, like ones that get into the characters' minds, always completely mess up a party, right? All of a sudden, your barbarian is turning its attention on you. Uh-oh. So stuff like that. But just in general, a lot of these monsters, they have powers and abilities, that if you can put into use, it really pushes the characters and your players to come up with solutions how to overcome them. So yes, this guy 100% the monsters know what they're doing.
Yeah, I uh, and even if you don't have the books, just look up Keith's website. Tons and I mean that's where it all started. His blog, you know,
Yeah.
that's so if you don't have the books or the means to get them, still go to Keith's blog. He has hundreds of articles that basically the books developed out of. So a
Hmm.
really good resource there.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going to take it back just a little bit to when you're actually putting your encounter together. A
Hmm.
couple of things to because you kind of tipped me into this when you're getting ready for it. A couple of things that I always like to have in mind when I'm putting together a combat encounter is understanding what the goal for the fight is.
Yeah.
You should always have a goal or a reason this fight is going to happen, right?
Hmm.
Because that gives you then what is the monster's goal in the fight.
Right.
Because that helps you figure out how to run them. Because I mean, one thing I think we sometimes think about is there's very few creatures that will fight to the death.
Right.
At some point
Right.
they're going to run away. They have something
Yeah.
they're trying to achieve, and if things go the wrong way, you know, but your point for this, and if you understand what your point is, which will help me get to my point, is that if you understand what you're trying to achieve with the goal or
Hmm.
achieve with the combat, what your goal is, that will help you figure out how to balance that encounter,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So if it's an introduction to a villain, right, and it's just the introduction, and the villain you really would like the villain to get away. Now the dice will decide whether that happens or not,
Right.
but you'd
Right.
really like the villain, so you stack the deck against the party because at some point you want the villain to get away. So
Yeah.
you want to lay a little whooping on the party so that they know, okay, this is what we're up against here. We're going to have to figure out how to deal with this, right? Or it could be, and I think you talked about this earlier, Egan, where you're trying to deplete resources over multiple short little skirmishes. They're
Yeah.
really just there to burn up resources. The
Yeah.
party is going to win against these battles, you know,
Right.
and but there's a reason because you're trying to get the party so when they get to the big bad end guy,
Yeah.
they're not as stacked as they were when they walked into the place, right?
Right.
Which is
Right.
going to make that end battle more challenging and more fun, right?
Yeah.
Or I mean, sometimes you need to put a bit of a rudder on the story
Hmm.
through something that happens in a combat, right? So
Yeah.
it'll help you figure out because I mean it gets back to what you talked about, Egan, where balanced is very relative to what you're trying to achieve. I
Hmm.
could call this balanced because I know the party is going to whip the tar out of these people, but then they
Right.
find something on them that guides the story,
Hmm.
right? So I'm not expecting that this is going to be a tough combat encounter for the party. It is meant to these goblins are meant to get whooped, but then they're carrying the MacGuffin that carries the story along for another
Right.
little while, right? So
Yeah.
um
Well, I also think too in that prep, I know we're focusing on the monsters, all right, plural, whatever, but there are other things that you can introduce to make things not so smooth for the characters. Use your environment,
yep,
use a time pressure,
yep.
pits of fire, cliff, a bridge, natural difficult terrains, if you will, versus just what the monster or the
Somebody can be
NPC
in
has.
danger, so they got to try
Oh
and
my
get to
God.
that person before
Yeah.
they're thrown off a cliff or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that they're going to be depleted of HP, but the damsel in distress is hanging over the ravine and you don't get to it in time because you're shooting cantrips instead of, breaking out some heavier stuff. So yeah, it's not just the monsters know what they're doing. They also know their environment, and
Yep.
they're going to use that to the best of advantage. Time pressure, that's a great one, right? And I've found that players like, yes, of course, bringing someone close to death is very gratifying, but so is just in the nick of time, right? They could all be healthy, but they just barely got there in time. It's equally as gratifying for a player, and it is a successful encounter from the perspective of a DM,
Yeah,
if
I
that makes
agree.
sense.
I agree
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, buddy, we are 36 minutes into this bad boy. We better wrap it up. So let's do this to finish her off there. So it can be something we already talked about or something we haven't talked about.
Mhm.
What is in your DM's toolbox in terms of helping? Not, it can be either helping balance it initially or helping it out when it starts to get incredibly out of balance when you're actually what's your best tip?
So I'm glad you brought that up because I know we've been talking about, how to balance encounters and whatnot. I also think that as a DM, you can have sort of safety nets that you have. So let's say you want to push it, right? It is an adult red dragon. It's maybe a little bit too much for them, but they don't get the cues and they decide to stand and fight. There are ways of introducing, gods that said, you're valiant fighting. I'm sending you back to finish a quest, but there will be a payment, almost like Dublin, if you will. Um, you have an NPC that has a scroll that can revivify, or you have, ways that you can let them go through a battle that maybe is too hard for them, but ways to not completely eliminate that character that further the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the big bad evil guy was meant to kill a character because now it's established this you got to get him. That's your revenge arc, right? So, you can keep that in your back pocket, have it ready for you if you need to bring it out, and then maybe you can push the combats a little bit harder, the challenges a little bit harder, without, destroying, as you said. Nobody likes to have their character get killed, but if there's a way to bring them back, maybe the lessons learned or whatnot. But I like to also keep that in my back pocket.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Definitely. I'm going to go back to, and I'm sure you will agree with this. Um, don't be afraid to play with the dials and the levers
Yeah.
and to change the monster as necessary to up that challenge and to keep to keep the combat exciting. I know
Yeah.
this idea for some purists is absolutely incomprehensible that somebody would mess with that gets right alongside of fudging dice rolls, and it's like for me challenge and fun are the most important thing here.
Yeah.
And the rest are just tools for me to achieve that. So I get over the idea that I shouldn't be, manipulating things behind the curtain.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. If it's going to up the fun, up the challenge, mission accomplished. I'm over it already, right?
Well,
So,
also too, think about this, like you're a player and you're in a drop down, drag it out fight. That nat 20 when it hits, what table hasn't roared with joy? That's what you want.
yeah.
That's what all of this is about. If you hit that nat 20 and you've just mowed down everybody, it's a nat 20 big deal. It's that clutch hit that just saves the day. I mean, that's what just keep that in your head. That's what we're trying to achieve. Maybe not every fight, and I do want to say this, it's okay if your characters mow down your big bag ugly because sometimes that's just what the dice tell you.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the dice are the ultimate unknown in that part of the game, and you just roll with it. And yeah, so I think we'll call this a wrap for episode 24 of Roll by Rolls Tavern Talk. Hopefully everyone has enjoyed tonight's topic. I have. I love this.
Oh,
I've been looking
all
forward
day.
to talking to about this one.
All
Tavern
night.
talks occur the Thursday after each of our Saturday night Adventures in Emathan sessions. So our next session will be on April 13th. I think that sounds right. Yeah, April 13th. For those of you watching on YouTube, please support us by making sure to like the videos and subscribing to the channel. So, we like to end every episode with a little cheers. So, cheers to you, Egan. Cheers, everyone. And thanks
Well,
for joining us in the tavern. Hopefully, you can join us again next time, and hopefully, Max will be back. So,
yes.
all right, sign us out. Thanks.